Hey guys, Chris Fix here. I'm on my way to go inspect a used car that I'm interested in purchasing, and I'm taking you with me. After watching this video, not only are you going to be more comfortable with going to check a used car, but you're going to know exactly what to look for so you don't get stuck with a bad car. The most expensive part in a car is the engine. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to inspect an engine in a used car so you don't buy a car with a bad engine. Now that being said, in this video, it's going to be impossible to cover every single thing. The video would be hours long. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do is if you have any cool tips and tricks, make sure you comment them below because I'm sure a lot of people are going to want to read the comments and learn new things and read the tips and tricks that you guys have to share. So that's enough talking, let's go and check out the car. We're here waiting to see the car, and there it is. So let's go meet the owner and inspect the car. How you doing? Chris.
Frank.
Nice to meet you, Frank. Alright, here she is. So as you know, I'm filming. I want to film this so that people could know how to buy a used car. Yep. This might take a little while, but I'm a serious buyer, so
take all the time you need.
If I could get the keys and check stuff out, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Are there any other keys besides this one?
No, unfortunately that's the only one.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, let's go check out this car. Alright, we're in the car, we have the key, and the first thing we're going to do, and this is what I do with every vehicle I look at, is we're going to use an OBD2 scanner, and we're going to scan the computer of the car. Super important. I start off doing this because if the computer detects problems, it'll let me know, and it'll tell me, okay, well, what are the problems? And if there are too many problems, it's not even worth taking this for a test drive or spending any more time looking at this car. Now, the OBD2 scan ports are typically under the driver's side steering wheel. There's the brake pedal. If we look upwards over here, it's going to typically be right under here somewhere. And then if you look over here, on these Jaguars, the scan port is right here. And we'll just plug this right in. We'll take our key and we'll start the car. Notice that there are no check engine, ABS, or airbag lights that are on, which is a good start. And then we'll go check out the app. Then we'll go and read the codes. And you can see here there are no confirmed codes, but we have one pending code. And if we look at our pending code right there, it's a P1000 code. That's the code you don't want to see. And the reason why you don't want to see that code is because that means somebody cleared the check engine light. And if you look on the dash here, there are no check engine light codes. There's no lights at all. So you'd probably think that, okay, good, there's no check engine lights, then we're good. But guess what? We just found that there's a pending code because somebody cleared it. I spoke with the owner about this. He said he got his oxygen sensors replaced on this car, and the mechanic cleared the codes, and that is why I always use an OBD2 scanner as the first thing to check in a car. So now we could go and shut the engine, and the next thing we're gonna look at is the engine compartment. So let's pop the hood. And you wanna make sure that the hood struts can support the hood. I hate when these things are weak and the hood can't stay up. So the first thing I like to do is just take a look under the hood. Just overall, what does it look like? We're checking out to see the cleanliness. We're looking for any obvious damage, leaks, anything like that. One thing I like to mention is if they detail this and they overly detail it, they use Armor All pieces, you know, everything's all shiny, it looks really good. A lot of times that signifies that the car has a problem that they're trying to hide, so they cleaned it up. You know, they're trying to hide an oil leak that you won't see because they cleaned it. In this case, the engine looks like it should look for a 130,000 mile car. You know, it's a little bit dirty, but it's relatively well taken care of. And there's nothing out of the ordinary that sends up any red flags. If there's nothing that catches my eye or looks out of the ordinary, the next thing I'll do is see if the frame is straight. I start by looking where the fender bolts up and make sure it's straight. One of the hardest things for a body shop to do is make sure this is perfectly straight. After an accident, bends the frame. So take a look at the fender and also where the fender bolts up to the front core support, and that looks nice and straight. Next, follow the core support across, and you want to make sure the front core support is not bowed or creased, and this looks good. And you want to go to this side and do the same thing. Look at the fender line and where it bolts up, and this looks straight. Now on this car, the front bumper was damaged. We saw that in the initial inspection, so investigate. You know, you see this damage in the front bumper? Look under the front bumper to see if there's any damage to the frame. And right away, I could see. Check this out. I'm gonna pull this back. This front cross member here is bent inwards and there's rust, so that's something that you really have to consider here. If the front cross member is bent inwards enough, is this side or that side of the subframe bent inwards? Is the engine sitting right? Is the suspension sitting right? That could affect the steering and many other things. And if you're unsure if there's frame damage, just walk away because it's not worth the hassle down the road if you buy the car. From what I could see, this doesn't look too bad and the damage is localized to this area. Plus the fenders look straight, the engine's sitting square with the frame, and even the core support's straight. So in this case, I want to see the rest of the car and test drive it to make sure it drives straight. Next, grab a flashlight and start inspecting for leaks. But instead of spending most of your time on the top of the engine, let's go underneath the car And the reason why we look underneath the vehicle is because leaks drip downwards, and this is the quickest way to check for any major leaks. And you just want to scan underneath, look for any leaks, any drips. The transmission looks nice and dry. If we look back over by the oil pan, that looks nice and dry. There is a little bit of oil on this catalytic converter, but it's nothing bad, and I don't see any major leaks. We'll check for more leaks once we get the car started. The next place to inspect for leaks is the cooling system. You want to open the cap to inspect, but make sure the engine's cold. Now, cars use different types of coolant, but make sure it's a bright color. In this case, we have red coolant, so it's bright red. You don't want to see any oil or brown sludge in here, because that could indicate there may be a head gasket leak, but this looks good. Now, not all coolant leaks are visible. If you have a head gasket leak inside your engine, you won't see that. So make sure the coolant is filled to the proper level, and this looks good. And the next thing we'll look at is the brake master cylinder. And you can see the fluid through the plastic. In this case, the minimum line is here, and the brake fluid is up to here, so this looks good. And you can just look around for leaks. Most of the time you'll see any leaks right back here, but this looks dry. The next thing to check is the power steering reservoir. And that's right over here. You want to check the fluid color, and you don't want to see dark fluid or specks of black. This fluid looks good, and it's filled to the proper level, so this looks good. You also want to follow the power steering lines to the pump, and check for any leaks. But again, this looks good. The next thing I like to do is check the oil. Take the oil fill cap off and look underneath. Sometimes you'll be able to tell if a car has a head gasket leak just by looking at underneath the cap. You'll see like a frothy white oil, almost like a milkshake or something like that. Up on the screen is an example of a BMW that I looked at that had a head gasket leak, and I found it right away just by looking underneath the oil cap. Besides looking at the cap, you also want to look inside the engine. And you don't want to see any froth or any sludge in there. What sludge is going to look like, it's going to look like chocolate syrup. And in this case, this looks good. And finally, check the oil dipstick and make sure the oil's filled all the way. In this case, it's right in the crosshatch area, so that's perfect. The other thing is, make sure it's not frothy, make sure there's no metallic specks, and if you see any of this, just walk away, it's not worth it. Find another car. Because it could mean that you have a head gasket leak or your engine is worn out pretty good. After checking the oil, the other thing you want to do is you want to find the transmission dipstick if you have one and check the transmission fluid. In this case, it's a sealed system, so we don't have a dipstick, so you can't check it. But if there is a dipstick, I have a really good video all about checking transmission fluid, so you can watch that and learn more. So the last thing we want to inspect are the hoses and the belts. We want to go around the engine compartment and make sure that the hoses aren't bulging, they're not cracked, and they're not brittle, and the rubber looks like it's in good condition. And just go around and inspect the different hoses, vacuum hoses, coolant hoses, and check all of them. Then after that, we want to go and check the belts. A good condition belt won't look shiny, it won't have frayed edges, it won't have any cracks on it, and when you press on it with your finger, it'll be pretty tight. So the engine's cold right now, and it's a good time to go and start the engine, but make sure you watch the exhaust as it starts. So let's go start her up. Go ahead, start her up. And in this case, we have no smoke, which is good. If you see blue smoke, that could mean that your valve seals are leaking into the combustion chamber as the car is sitting here. And then when you go to start the car up, you get a burst of blue smoke, and then it goes clear. Now you want to ask the owner to rev the car a little bit. Can you rev the car up a little bit? Good. So what we were looking at the smoke to make sure that there's no blue smoke. A little bit of smoke came out, but that's just because the car just started, and that's condensation. But if the car starts puffing white smoke, that could mean you have a head gasket leak. If it starts puffing blue smoke, you could have worn out piston rings. But in this case, we're good. Here's an example of a van that's burning oil. Upon giving the car gas, blue smoke comes out of the exhaust. And here's another example of a Beetle with the same problem. So that gives you a good idea of what to look for. Make sure you do the same check when the car is warmed up as well, because you might only get smoke when the car is warm. Now let's shut the engine and move to the front of the car and have the owner start it up again. At the front of the car, ask the owner to start the engine again and watch the motor for movement. A little movement's okay, but you don't want to see a lot of movement, like this van engine, because that means the motor mounts are worn out. So ask the owner to start her up, and that looks good. Again, we're going to check for leaks using our flashlight, but this time with the engine running. When we have everything under pressure, we're more likely to find a leak. So we have a couple things we want to look at. We want to look at the cooling system, we want to look at the master cylinder, we want to check out the engine, any hoses, the water pump. Look over here, we got our ABS, we got our power steering. So just take a quick peek around and see what you can find. And in this case, everything's looking real good. So leak-wise, we look good. The other thing you want to check is with the oil cap removed. Put your hand over the hole to see if there's any pulsing of air. Right now I don't feel any pressure or vacuum and there's no smoke coming out. If you have strong puffs of air and smoke, the piston rings could be worn out and causing a significant amount of blow-by, and in that case the engine might be worn out. That being said, if you do get a light positive pressure or a vacuum, that's normal for some engines. Just make sure the pulses aren't strong and there's no smoke. In this case the engine feels fine, but it's amazing how much information you could get just by looking under the oil cap. And then finally, while the engine's running, you're just going to be listening, you're going to be watching. You want to make sure that the engine isn't vibrating significantly. You want to make sure that the idle is constant, it's not revving up and down, and it just sounds like it's running well. You don't want to hear any loud ticking. There's going to be little ticks because of the fuel injectors, like this. But this sounds good, this sounds normal, so everything's checking out. And then after you go for your test drive, it's always good, and I always suggest it again, shut the engine off and start it up. Listen for it again. Do the same test. Check for smoke. Check for that pressure, because things change when the engine's cold versus when the engine's warm. Right now the engine's warming up. And then the last thing to do is ask the owner to shut the engine, and then you're going to watch to make sure there's no significant vibration, there's no knocking noise, there's none of that. Can you shut the car? And that shuts right off. So that was good. To me, this is one of the most important things because engine work and transmission work could get expensive. So I spend the most time here and on the test drive, and everything's just checking out pretty good right now. So let's move on to inspecting the interior. Or not. And this just doesn't want to close. Can you pop the hood? Okay, so before we inspect the interior, this hood latch is working, but this hood latch over here isn't latching. And if we take a look under the hood, this is why it's not catching. The hood cable, this looks all rusted, so I feel like this might need a new hood cable. So, I mean, that's just something that you see when you're checking things out. I went to go shut the hood, and this doesn't close on this side. And that is definitely a problem. So that covers most of the main things I look at when I inspect an engine in a used car. Hopefully the video was helpful, and for the next video in the series, I'm going to go over some pretty cool tips and tricks for inspecting the interior of a used car. Many of the tips are things you wouldn't think about, but when you hear them, you're going to be like, oh, why didn't I think of that? To get to that video, you could click on the screen or find the link in the description.